Hi, I'm David the Good, and I believe in frugal living. No, I don't like that. No, let's start again. Hi, I'm David the Good, and today I'm going to show you how to start your first vegetable garden without breaking the bank. People make gardening way too complicated and way too expensive. At this point I could insert some sort of a rant about our greedy robber baron multinational corporations or something like that, but I'm just going to tell you, you don't really need to get caught up in buying this and buying that and doing this or that complicated system. You don't need to have cedar boards for the side. You don't need special containers or self-watering doodads. You don't need to even, get block or pressure treated and be a carpenter to build a bed. And you especially don't need some sort of big, complicated aquaponics system. All you really need to garden is a patch of soil, got some sunshine, got some water, got your seeds, and you just have to feed it with something along the way. So nature does all of that. As you can see behind me, this is an uncut piece of tropical rainforest. Some time ago, this was probably all sugar cane in here. This was part of a big plantation, lots of sugar cane. And then, the farmers moved on, and guess what? It all grew back. Why is it that our gardens are so complicated and hard and we think we need all kinds of things? Well, plants grow right on their own. There's a few reasons for it, obviously. Our vegetables are more high maintenance than a lot of things growing back here in the jungle. But even with that, we can kind of short circuit the process a little bit. We can make some little shortcuts to do things affordably and in a very non-complicated and simple way. I always like to take something big and complicated and say, what can we get rid of? How can we simplify this big mess? So that's what we're going to do. Today we're going to simplify this big mess. And this is a perfect time because I just moved to my own land. After years of renting and being stuck borrowing land and farming on other people's plots, I finally have my own piece. So I'm going to put in some permanent garden beds where I'm going to grow my own food to feed my family. And so this is a time, I think, it would be perfect to take you guys along and show you how do I start this thing from scratch. So let's walk through it right now. These two beds that are right here. Now I told you guys, you don't have to put any borders on the beds. I made these out of scrap wood, 6 months ago or so. We stuck a couple of beds in here and put a few vegetables in them. They're mostly tapped out, and I just handed them over to a couple of my kids to replant. They were, as of a day ago, this was all brush like this tall. So these got cleared and weeded. The few things that were still edible in them got weeded around, and the kids have replanted transplants. But I am going to continue this line that I started here because I'm not a complete anarchist. These beds are 4 foot wide. Now John Jeevens, the grow bio-intensive guy, he likes 5 foot beds. I don't like 5 foot beds. He likes 5 foot beds for the microclimate that it creates when all the leaves touch and all that kind of stuff. I'm not that fancy. I like a 4 foot bed because I can reach halfway this way, reach halfway the other way, and even kids can get in there and weed it without having to step down in the middle and that sort of thing. So I like a 4 foot wide bed if I'm going to do beds. And then these have a 3 foot wide path. Now 3 foot wide is nice, particularly when you have stuff that runs over the edges. Like if you grow a tomato plant next to the edge, the tomato plant's going to come up like this, and you go walking sideways. I've seen people do 1 foot paths in between their beds. You got a 1 foot path, you're going like this. And when you have these edges, it becomes almost a hazard. You're like going back and forth, almost tripping over it. So I wouldn't go any more narrow than 2 feet. 3 feet is really nice because you can have a couple people weeding at the same time in the bed and you're not running into each other. Or if you're like really fat, you know, great. You can hit the Golden Corral and come home and weed. So 36 inches is what I got here. I might go down to 2 foot here, because I'm just going to be doing some dirt beds. Let me show you how I'm going to do that. I'm just going to go 2 foot. 2 foot takes me out like there. Now that's still a decent path right there. So I can put one bed here, go 4 foot. See, there's my 2 foot, 4 foot right here. I can go another 2 foot, and then I can fit one more 4 foot bed. If I go full 3 footer, I'm not gonna make it. So I'm gonna cheat a little bit and do 2 foot wide on these guys. So first thing I'm gonna do is build this bed right here. I'm gonna mark the corners so I know my spacing before I start digging. There we go. It's a 4 by, let's see, 4 by 12. That'll grow you a lot of vegetables. Let's dig it. So, if you don't know, what I'm doing here is called double digging. You dig a trench, and then you fork the bottom of it up, and then you turn the next one over into it, and it's a lot of work. Really a lot of work. It loosens the soil quite deeply, makes for the most amazing garden bed you've ever seen, but it's a ton of work. Fortunately, there is a much easier way. Hey, you can do it. Come on, put your back in it. Come on. Yeah, you got it. You can do it.
Done.
Oh, good job. Thank you. Go get some water. So now all we have to do is dump this back into this trench, the dirt we took from the first bit. And we have a big mess of dirt. Let's make it look pretty. You're just going to rake it nicely so you've got a good spot for your seeds and transplants, and it doesn't just look like a big ugly mound of dirt. Now I know I said there was an easier way, and then I put my daughter on it. I realized that a lot of you guys are probably watching from the United States or Canada or Australia or places with strict child labor laws. There actually is an easier way to build a bed than double digging. It doesn't necessarily give you the same incredible, deep, fluffy bed. And there we go. That is a nice, finished 4x12 double dug bed. Now I told you there's an easier way. The easier way is to just take your spading fork, say, okay, I want to start another bed right here. I'm going to do another 4x12. I am going to do another 4x12 because all this ground behind me is going to end up beds eventually. But I've got this fork, and I'm just going to go like this. Loosen to the top of the fork. This fork is an old antique, and I can just go like this. And what I'm going to do is just fork it up, take out the rock. You note I'm not going nearly as deep because I was getting about 10 to 12 inches probably with the spade, followed by maybe another 8 with this fork. Real deep. Now you may not have really compacted soil. You may have a back that does not agree with all that digging. I say, well, you know what, I'll just take my fork and I'll do a bed like this. This gets you to about the depth of a regular tiller, which is the other method that you can use if you want to go really fast and put in a garden. Borrow somebody's tiller, go down to your local store there, and you can often get it at a tool rental place. 40 bucks, you can go till up, you know, an entire half acre of ground if you want to. The problem with the tiller is that it doesn't go nearly as deep, shreds the ground, and if you do it in the wrong time of year, like if you've got real mucky soil or something, and you do it then, you could really end up making a big mess of your yard. This is a little easier to control and gentler, but it's really hard to beat what you get. How fast you get it with a tiller, like it's just amazing. It feels like, holy moly. I mean, if I had a tiller right now, just tear this whole thing up, cut, you know, run strings through the whole area and run beds. It's awesome. I do not fault anybody for doing that, even though you may kill a few earthworms. So when I do this, I can just go back in like this and make a nice, soft bed. And I'm going to do the same thing as much as possible. Pick the rocks out, pick the perennial weeds out. Yeah, we don't need all this. You know, bust the clods. I could do the same thing that I did in the other one, just not quite so intense and not as deep. That's the easier way. For those of you that don't really feel like doing all that digging, or don't have a really strong daughter. I have here some beautiful compost. Still see little bits of eggshells and stuff in it. Perfect. And when I make a bed like this, we'll cover the rest of the fertilizing later because you're going to fertilize through the season too. But when I make a bed like this, I like to throw a little compost on it right at the beginning. And so this little bit right here, I'll just go across and go like this. Doesn't need a ton. If you're not composting, I highly recommend you set up a little area. Start composting all your kitchen scraps. When you mow the lawn, you go ahead and throw your grass clippings in. You know, you get serious, you take the shredded paper from the office, or you know, get all the paper plates from your next church picnic. Throw chicken bones in there, it doesn't matter. I wrote the book Compost Everything, The Good Guide to Extreme Composting, and I do compost just about everything, so long as you keep the rats out and keep the smell down. You could throw meat in there, you could throw lasagna in there, throw a gallon of spoiled milk in there. All that stuff can be returned to the soil. Much better than throwing it in a landfill, don't you think? I think so. So you notice I'm not putting a ton of compost on here. This is not an incredible amount of compost. You don't really need a whole ton, especially if it's new ground. You'll see some people using just massive amounts of compost. Plants don't really need that much to be happy. I'm going to run a little bit short here, but that's fine. That's good. We're ready to start transplanting, I'd say. Before you actually go ahead and start transplanting or planting anything or even buying seeds, I know it's really hard because you get to the middle of winter and you're like, I have a seed catalog. Like, I want everything. I want the tomato that's like a kaleidoscope. Before you get to that stage, if you can help yourself, you have to figure out why you're gardening. Now, I've went and I dug a bed. Why am I even doing this? What was I thinking? Why did I spend all that work? Okay, do I think things are gonna get worse economically? Am I a prepper? Am I stacking ammo and gold and putting baked beans underneath my bed? Well, in that case, I'm gardening for survival, right? I want food in hard times. So my focus should be, for a garden like that, on staple crops, right? So heavy duty calories. We want to plant potatoes if we're farther north. Maybe you would plant some grain varieties of corn. You might plant Jerusalem artichokes, provided your intestinal tract can handle them. You might plant turnips. You know, you get a little further south, you get into the tropics, a little more tropical, you go for sweet potatoes. A little more tropical than that, you go for true yams, Dioscorea species, one of my favorite, cassava, you know. So if you're in a survival gardening mode, plant those high calorie crops first, and secondarily you're going to plant high nutrition crops. So medicinal / nutrition. So you put in things like garlic. You would put in maybe rosemary. That's good medicinal stuff. Oregano. You could put in highly nutritious crops like cabbage and kale. So you're going to have those around the edges. Your main focus is on getting you through, feeding you, filling you up, and then secondarily you're going to go for medicinal. Now, maybe you're not in the survival gardening mode at all. Maybe you want to live a healthier lifestyle. Maybe you love herbs. Maybe you want to start distilling your own essential oils. Well, in that case, let's take some of those things, rosemary and oregano. Let's plant an herb garden. So you go find the herbs that you like to grow and you plant a bunch of those. Maybe you're in a money-saving mode. You're not a survivalist necessarily. You're a mom. You've got kids that you want to feed and you have specific vegetables that you want to eat. The problem is when you go to the store and you buy the vegetables, you don't know what they've been sprayed with. You don't know how they've been handled. You don't know if you're going to get E. coli or something horrible. You know, so you're like, I want to be healthy. I want my kids to eat good food. But if I go to the organic market, totally breaks the bank. So I'm stuck buying bags of produce that I'm not completely happy with. So in that case, what are you going to do? You're going to look at your receipts. You probably already know in your head what you guys eat regularly. Maybe you're going to plant some tomatoes. Maybe you plant some fresh basil. Maybe you plant carrots. What are you eating on a regular basis that you could get organically out of your garden in your backyard, knowing you're getting the highest quality and freshest produce? So you determine what you want to do in your garden first, and then say, okay, this is my game plan, this is where I'm going to focus. Now, if you want success right off the bat, like this is your first garden, let's go for the simplest stuff. This is how I wrote the book, Totally Crazy Easy Florida Gardening. It's like, so far as I know, it seems like it's the best-selling Florida gardening book on Amazon, as best as I can tell in the rankings. It's done very well, very popular in the state of Florida. But in Totally Crazy Easy Florida Gardening, what I did was planted a wide variety of crops over multiple years. And then the crops that were the easiest to grow, that did the best, that needed the least amount of work, that stood the heat and the weeds and the bugs and everything else, I planted them again and again and again. And I got an idea over time, okay, this thing will die, this one will live. This one dies, this one lives. And I planted and I grew, and I planted and I grew bed after bed after bed, until I had a really good idea how you could grow a very good garden in the state of Florida in my backyard. But your backyard is probably not in north central Florida, zone 8B/9A, along a ridge. Okay, everybody's backyard is going to be a little different. Even if you lived a city over, you might have a little bit different. My recommendations are going to work for the state of Florida, but they're probably not going to work the same for Georgia, or California, or New Zealand. There's a big change in climate, and when we buy seeds, you might be buying seeds that are coming from New England or Brisbane. If they're grown in that climate, and you take them and you grow them in Arizona or Costa Rica, you're going to get different results than how they originally grew in New England or Brisbane, right? So when you put them in your garden, you are putting them in a completely different environment than the one they were necessarily adapted to, unless you find a really local seed company and plant from them. There's different environments, and different plants do better under different things. We know that plants adapt to where they are. So you have some options to figure out what the easiest crops are for your garden. Option number one is to take the scientific method. The scientific method is to just go and get all different varieties of seeds and plants from wherever, anything that strikes your fancy, anything you're interested in. You plant your garden beds. The first year, you're going to have failures, all kinds of failures. We always have failures, but you might have a bunch of failures because you're just trying everything, right? The ones that fail, you say, okay, well, that one didn't do very well. Well, it might be a bad year. I really want to try it again. So you try it again the next year if you want to. Or you just discard it right off the bat. Quick death, sudden death, right? So such and such type of bean did not grow well for me. I'm done with it. And you plant another type of bean. That one does well the next year. Okay, hold on to it. So what you do is you hold on to the ones that grow well. And if you can save seeds, that's even better because they'll start to adapt to your environment. The best and healthiest plants, you save seeds from those, they'll adapt to your climate. After a few generations, you'll have a variety that does much better than they would right from the seed packet. So what you're going to do is just plant a bunch of stuff that you're interested in, select out the ones that do really well, plant them again the next year. So you're doing the scientific method. You're not necessarily making control groups and all that kind of stuff, though you can if you have that kind of mind. You can just plant a whole ton of stuff and just see what survives. Whatever survives, plant it again because it's better adapted to your climate. Keep trying new things. Don't just buy one variety of tomatoes and then say, oh, tomatoes don't grow here when they do poorly. No, buy like 5 different types. One of those varieties might do really well. You could chuck the other 4 and then get 4 more different varieties the next year and add them to that one, and you can kind of figure out which tomatoes do well. Now that's the scientific way to do it. That takes longer. The way you can really make it easy is to do the phone a friend method. So you join a gardening group, or you're walking around your neighborhood and you see an old lady out there gardening, and you say, hey, what are you growing? And she tells you what you're growing. How long have you been growing that? Well, I've been growing it for 20 years, so it obviously does well. May I have some seeds? Or where did you get the seeds? Right? So you find out what somebody has already done the scientific method on. They've been growing such and such tomato. Amish paste tomato has been doing really well 4 blocks from you. Okay, plant that. Another thing you can do, okay, you make friends with gardeners. You could join a local gardening meetup group. You know, pick their brains. What grows really easy for you? What grows really quickly? You'll figure it out. Another thing you can do is rely on the power of capitalism, right? If it's being grown commercially in your area, chances are it grows really well in your area because businessmen, farmers, over time have determined, okay, this is really good area. What do we think of when we think of Georgia, right? Jimmy Carter. We think of peanuts. You think of pecans. You think of peaches. Those all grow really well there, so probably plant some of those. Now, if you go to your local farmer's market, you see all this produce, and where do you grow? Well, I grow right up the road there in Fort McCoy. Wow, Fort McCoy, okay, that's like 25 miles from me. What are you growing? Oh, I grew this and this and this. How do they do for you? Are they easy? Oh yeah, it's super easy, no problem. Okay, grow that. So they're growing for the market and selling it. It may not be as wild and crazy as you want to try. It might not be those kaleidoscope tomatoes, but you know, it might be something that just really is going to do well. It's almost certainly going to do well. And so you've got these things that are really suited to your area, and you're just going to roll with them because that's the way to do it, the easy way, and we're all about doing it the easy way. Now I know what I want to grow. I want to grow everything in the entire world. So it's very easy for me to plant a garden bed. My big problem is planting all of the transplants and seeds I seem to accumulate. It's actually kind of ridiculous. What I'm putting in right now are some bell pepper transplants. I don't believe in putting them super tight. This is plenty tight. I don't like to put my transplants or my seeds too close together because when you do that, they fight. And I don't want them to fight. I don't want them to be struggling for light and resources. So I give them a decent amount of space. So I have here some lettuces. I have some cauliflower. Love cauliflower. And you see I plant them to the same height that they were basically in the tray. So you look at the bottom of them and say, okay, there's my soil height. That's good. Right there. Now, it's important too when you're doing your spacing, you know, you don't go too tight. It's actually better to go too far apart than it is to go too tight. If you go too far apart, you just have to weed a little more in between. But if you go too tight, sometimes everything just strangles all up on each other and they don't produce very much. You'll actually get more production by planting farther apart sometimes than you will by planting really tightly. It's kind of a paradox, but it's like, you know, you think you're going to get more by cramming them in, but you don't really. So if you are going from seeds, look and see, what's the spacing that they recommend? Just go with that. Go a little wider. Either way, go with it or go a little wider. See, I'm gonna plant this bed with just this little thing of transplants here very easily. I can plant the whole thing. Give them plenty of space. Now, there's some dispute over seeds versus transplants. I got these transplants the other day, about 25 cents each from a local place. They just pull them out of the trays and you go up to the front and they count them, and there you go. You've got a whole bunch of them, so it hardly costs anything, and it's really easy because I could see them already and I don't have to wait for them to germinate. But there is a big benefit to planting instead seeds, and the benefit of that is there's no transplant shock, first of all, So when you plant them, they're not just, you know, struggling from being in a really nice, perfect environment, getting watered all the time, to suddenly being out in this middle of this really sunny, hot area and suffering and suffering and suffering, and it's so terrible. Like a little baby suffering. It's so sad. You plant them right in the ground from seed, and they grow right where they are, and they get strong, and they like it, and they're well adapted to the spot. Now, if you have a colder climate with a shorter growing season, it makes sense to start transplants early. That's really the best time for doing transplants. The best situation for transplants is when you're in a place where you've got to get a jump on the growing season, you want to get something in, and there you go. But you'll save a lot more money by going from seeds. There's a big benefit to that, price-wise, because you could pay, you know, $2 for a packet of seeds. That might get you 4 transplants, but that packet of seeds could have 50 in it. So if you start your own transplants, you save a lot of money, or if you direct seed, you save a lot of money. Another benefit of direct seeding is when you stick them right in, their roots go straight down. They can go for resources quickly. And an additional benefit, I forgot what I was going to say. Totally lost it. There was one more benefit of seeds. Oh, I remember. An additional benefit of going with seeds over transplants is that seeds are so cheap, you can just throw a bunch of seeds in, and whatever comes up and looks really good, then you can thin it out later. You don't really want to do that when you spend 50 cents a transplant. But if I was going to do this in seeds, I would just make a furrow right down here, plant them closer together, cut out the weak ones when they come up, and let the strong survive. And I might thin a couple of times until they get out to about here, and it still cost me less than a transplant. Now we're planting pak choi. If we have some cauliflower and then some kale got mixed in, they look pretty similar. These varieties look similar. They both have a little purple in their leaf. But look at that. While I was prattling on about seeds versus transplants, we pretty much got the whole bed planted. It takes way longer to dig it than it does to plant it. Alright, space for you. I've still got transplants left over. I have to have my daughter dig another bed. There's my last bell right there. Look at you. There we go. That is satisfying, folks. Let's talk a little bit about tools. You don't need fancy gadgets. I mean, you don't need a big composting tumbler to make compost. All you can do is just take a few pallets and lash them together and throw compost on the inside of it. Just throw everything in there to rot. You know, there's usually an easy way. You don't need to go buy something in the back of the gardening catalog that's really complicated to turn the ground or whatever else. I find myself using the same simple hand tools over and over and over again. I don't have a whole ton of gardening tools. I have more than average, but I don't have a lot of gadgets. I have good simple tools. So you've already seen my spade and my fork that I use for double digging or for loosening the ground. They get used for planting trees, and the fork gets used for loosening, and you know, there's a lot of use that just any good spade or shovel will give you. So that's so simple, we're not even going to talk about it. And you've seen my little trowel. One of the kids gave me this one as a gift. And you know, you don't actually need a trowel if you have a machete. Machete is one of my favorite gardening tools. This is a nice kind of short, simple type. When it's got this nice thick steel to it. This is a Martindale. I think it's called a mongoose. So this style here is actually quite versatile. You can use this instead of a trowel. I can just dig in the ground with this actually very easily, and you can just kind of crouch, whack it in the ground, stick a transplant in. Boom, whack it in the ground, stick a transplant in, you know, and you can chop through roots, you can take down brush, you can chop up stuff before you throw it into the compost pile, and you can compost your enemies. The other tool that I find using a lot during the season, after I've planted, when the weeds start coming out and being a problem, is just a regular old garden hoe. This is an antique that I got on a date with my wife when we were in the town of Micanopy in Central Florida. I saw this in an antique shop. I bought it for 15 bucks. It's one solid piece all the way around. This is an old style one. The new style ones are made of crummier metal. They don't hold the blade. You might not have thought about it, but this is a blade right here. So when you see, you know, you're hacking at the ground with a hoe, it's not the right way to do it. You should be able to, with a small amount of effort, do the hoeing that you need to do. In order to do that, small amount of effort, sharpen the blade. So you get your, take that old hoe out of the workshop or wherever you have it, back in that dusty corner with all the torture implements, and put a nice edge on it. This one's got a ding in it right here that I have to hammer out, but otherwise I'll just put a nice blade on it. You also want to make sure that you bend this head right here so this has a good angle. So if I'm standing up, this shouldn't be, I shouldn't have to like do like this or do like this. It should be at a good cutting edge to the ground, so when I'm at a comfortable angle, I can just go along and weed like this. The idea is to decapitate the weeds. The idea is to decapitate the weeds, not to, you know, chop big divots in the ground. You want it to kind of go along the ground. That's why it has that angle. And if you have nice loose soil, like in your well-dug beds, it's very easy to use a hoe. So once you put an edge on there, make sure you take care of the wood handle too. This is linseed oil. The boiled linseed oil dries faster. But my friend Steven Edholm of Skill Cult thinks that they probably put some sort of weird petroleum stuff in it or something, so he doesn't like it as much. I will use either. I'm not actually all that picky. But what you do is you just oil up all the wood surfaces, and this oil will soak in and dry, and it will make it last longer, help keep it from dry rotting, give it a little solar protection, keep it from wet rotting too. And now you've got a nice, happy handle. I'll actually oil the entire head when I do it too, and just to keep it from rusting. And that's it. These tools are pretty much all you need for a good, simple, frugal garden bed. Now I know this is about starting your first vegetable garden, but I would be remiss if I did not give you any idea about ongoing care. Obviously, when you put in transplants or you plant your seeds, you want to water them. You want to keep them watered. And watering is one of those things that gardeners like to dispute about. Personally, I'm a big fan of garden hoses. I like to come out when I have a few garden beds and just spray water them as I go. That is nice because I get a chance to go out there and see what each garden bed is doing and go. Sometimes, like right here where my garden hose doesn't reach, I'll just take one of these 2-gallon watering cans and I'll just walk along and I'll just give everybody some care. And it gives me an idea, okay, are we having any bugs? Do we have any issues? Is anything gnawing on the plants? Do any of them look like they're getting yellow, like they're hungry? You know, and then I can just take care of them as I go. But the argument comes with, what do? Do you put sprinklers in? A lot of people will say, oh, don't use sprinklers. You want a drip irrigation system. You want to get some soaker hoses or something like that. I actually don't like doing that. The reason I don't like doing that is because in Florida, the squirrels will bite holes in the soaker hoses, for one. But also, I don't like plumbing. I don't like to have to haul these things around, and I'm always changing the configurations of my beds and digging things in different places and planting trees and stuff. So having a bunch of bits of plastic soaker hose on the ground, I just really don't like it. So when I had a plant nursery and I had about 20 garden beds going, what I did is one day I had a friend of mine come over, we bought some Rainbird sprinkler heads, and we made standpipes. So we stuck some pieces of rebar or something in the ground like this high, tied the PVC up to them, and just ran PVC pipes to a little on nozzle, and just boom, we turn that thing on, the whole area rains. So you get it so the rainbirds overlap each other and it acts like rain. It just comes down and waters the area, and people will say, well, you're losing a lot to evaporation. Yes, that's true, but I really hate having to deal with all the little fiddly bits of a drip system. I just don't like to deal with it. Now, if you want to do a drip system, go ahead and do it. If it gets any more complicated than a few beds that you water with a hose, I just prefer to put standpipes up. Eventually, I might just put standpipes over this whole area, or I might not. I might just garden with the rain, which is the simplest option of them all. So, the important thing is, if it starts to get dry in the ground, you stick your finger in and it's still dry underneath there, then you got a problem. You're gonna have to water. So, pretty much gonna water every couple of days in the summer. When it's in the spring and fall and it's a little cooler, generally you can get away with watering once or twice a week. If your plants are closer together, you have to water more. If they're a little further apart, you generally have to water less. So, important thing is just make sure they get water, because that is the big limiting factor. The plants will die first without water faster than they would die without any kind of food. Now, within a week or so after you plant your bed, you're gonna have to start weeding. So, like I said, you get your hoe really sharp, you just kind of go around the plants like this. And the idea is if you get the weeds when they're small and knock them down, they don't get big. When they get big, you're gonna be like, die, 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 I hate you, die. But when they're small, you just kind of, oh, let's see, I'm just gonna kill a whole bunch of little babies. No big deal, it's so easy, right? So you just go in between, you know, taking them out as you go, and it's a nice task. But if you let it go very long, it gets to be ridiculous. It's really easy when they're small. You're like, there we go, gotcha. There we go, gotcha. Just stay on top of it through the growing season, because it will get away from you, and then it gets to be a major pain in the neck. As for pests, when you see something, you know, when you see a plant that looks kind of sick and weak and it's got bugs all over it, I generally just let the bugs eat it, because I figure they're distracted by that sick, ugly plant. I don't mind if I lose a few. It's fine. And generally the ladybugs are coming up from behind somewhere to come and get those pests. But if you get an infestation where multiple of your plants are all getting taken out at once or something, I just recommend you go around with a little bowl of soap water and you just knock all the pests into it, squish them with your hands, knock them into the bowl, let them drown, and then throw the whole bowl of soapy water and dead insects into your compost pile. Pick them off as they go though, and keep an eye on it. Put your garden bed too far away from your house, you're not going to keep your eye on it. It's important to put it in a place where you're going to see it and check on it, because something like hornworms, which are a big terrifying green worm that grow on tomato plants and tobacco plants, they can just completely defoliate a plant in a couple of days. So you want to catch them when they're small and get rid of them, instead of coming out and finding a worm this big on a big stick that used to be your pride and joy Cherokee purple. Generally, throwing a little bit of compost, maybe a 1/4 inch over the bed right at the beginning, is enough to feed your plants throughout the season. But sometimes you maybe have some more depleted soil or some more hungry plants, so they start to look a little yellow, they look like they need a little more love. If you're interested in a full presentation on feeding your garden, I'm not going to sell you one. I'm going to send you to YouTube, because I posted an entire video called 7 Ways to Feed Your Garden for free, which covers a whole bunch of things that you probably already have or have access to that you can use to feed and fertilize your gardens and your fruit trees for free. I told you, I like to do things as frugally as possible. I like to make my own compost. I like to hunt down fertilizers that I can use, you know, ashes and seaweed and all kinds of other things. But you'll see it in the video. 7 Ways to Feed Your Garden for free. Just look it up on YouTube. And also, if you want to start composting, I have a guide on composting, super easy composting, which you can download for free. There will be a link next to this video. You can also check me out on my daily website, thesurvivalgardener.com. davidthegood.com, where I post a lot of articles on gardening. There's over 2,500 there. You can drop me an email, ask me questions. You can also find me on my YouTube channel, David the Good. Look for David the Good. You'll find me on YouTube. You can also find me on unauthorized.tv, also under David the Good. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate you spending a little time. Go out there and plant a garden bed. It's a lot of fun. It's well worth it. And until next time, may your thumbs always be green.